So these are the things that we actually did in the class as properties of stars. And you will see that those things, and also another thing that we talked is the color of a star, how to find the color of a star by measuring the same, measuring the luminosity or the magnitude of the star using two different wavelengths and then taking the difference of that, right? So those are the properties of the stars that we learn. And after that, we learn about uh, the raw materials of stars, that is about the interstellar matter between stars. And then we talked about the triggering star formation. So that means we now we know that this interstellar matter is what we should have to form stars, but there are different conditions that need to satisfy to form a star out of this interstellar matter. And those conditions also we learned. Remember that we talked about the virial theorem, and this virial theorem we have talked in classical mechanics as well. And from that we have derived a condition called Jeans criteria. And if this Jeans criteria, which will give you the minimum mass that you should have for a molecular cloud in interstellar matter in order to form a star, right? Now when we have a star formed in that way, so these are called as there is a condition. And then we talked about the HR diagram. So that is the diagram that we need to explain all these properties of the stars and also the fate of a star. So that means what will happen to a star, I mean, during its lifetime, right? And this HR diagram nicely incorporate all these temperatures, spectral class, magnitude, luminosity, all these properties into one diagram. And based on the place of a star on the HR diagram, you can tell what kind of a star uh, is that and what will happen to that particular star in the future, right? Now this is what we have learned uh, before the new year. And also I guess we briefly talked about the first phase of a star. After a star is formed, it will enter to this main sequence of the HR diagram, if you remember. And then what happens is the star will start to burn hydrogen into helium, right? Now these are called main sequence stars. And after it burns hydrogen into helium in the central region, so it will once it end up all these material in the central region, which is hydrogen, then the star will go into a different stage. From main sequence, it will go into this giant phase, right? We call that as a red giant, right? Now if you remember, I told you that what happens when sun becomes a red giant, right? Like that. So the stars will become very huge at that point. And also I uh, told you that we don't need to worry about the sun as of now, because sun will be on the main sequence for next 5 billion years, right? And so these are the things actually we have discussed before the new year for this course. Now, actually, we need to look at what happened to stars after this giant phase. And before that, I want to talk with you about this topic about the clusters of stars. The reason is, now if you look at uh, the things that we have been talking, I have told you that for one particular star to go into the next phase, it will take around billions to millions of years, right? And one thing that we talked, if you remember, that if a star has a higher mass, if the mass is very huge, then that star will go through this evolutionary process very quickly, because the nuclear reactions will be faster for these massive stars. So they will spend a very smaller compared to the others, the smaller or the less lighter stars. The heavier stars will spend like lesser time in the main sequence, and then they will go into the next phase quickly. So this is due to the fact that their mass is higher, and because of the gravity is higher in these stars, so that the nuclear reactions will be faster. So they will quickly burn hydrogen into helium, and then they will move out and go into this main sequence phase. Out of the main sequence phase into the giant phase. And also similarly for the other phases, you will see in this next set of lectures that they will finish up each stage very quickly, and when go into their final stage, right? Now the question that you should have is, if a star is like, I mean, so I have put this slide which was not available in the previous years, because I got a question from students, how actually we can study even this evolutionary process, because our lifetime is 70 to 60 to 70 years. Now these stars, they like spend billions of years in one particular evolutionary process, regardless of whether they are high mass or low mass. Even for high mass stars, they will spend like around like millions of years in one particular phase, right? So if you try to look at one particular star and study what happened to this particular star in its evolutionary process, you will not be able to study it, right? Because you will die before the star. The star has a long, very long lifetimes compared to us. Now, what actually we are doing when we studying stars is, the advantage that we have is, if you look at a sample of stars, you can have different kinds of stars which are like spending different eras of their life, and some of them will be on the main sequence and some of them will be on the giant phase. And this is what I want to show you when I was assigning these to look at these 4 stars up in the sky, right? Like Betelgeuse and these kind of Sirius and these kind of stars, because these stars are actually different stages of their life, right? So this is the advantage we have. Now, when we talk about these clusters of stars, the advantage that we have is when you observe a cluster of stars. So from the name, you can see that the cluster of stars means collection of large number of stars in a particular location of the sky, right? Now, when you look at this star cluster, you will have different kinds of stars who are spending at different stages of their life, right? So this is the advantage that we have. And using that advantage, by studying those star clusters, actually we can study different stages of a star in its lifetime. So this is how we do studies, right, in practically. So otherwise there is no way of studying one particular star and decide everything, right? So that's not going to happen during our lifetime. Fortunately, you have star clusters and you have huge number of stars in the sky to study, right? So that is, so astronomers are getting advantage of that. So what we are doing is, actually instead of observing evolution of a single star, we can look at a group of clusters of stars. Right now, this is why we are talking about star clusters at this particular point. Right now, if we look at the star clusters, basically there are 2 types of star clusters. The first type is called open clusters, and the second type is called globular clusters, right? And actually now we have another type called associations, which we don't talk too much. But if you look at this table, there are 3 types here, and you can see that in the galaxy, we will talk about galaxies, by the way, in the next few chapters. You have around 150 globular clusters, and open clusters, there are thousands of open clusters, and clearly you can see that the number of open clusters are larger compared to globular clusters. And if you take a particular galaxy has I think 2 or 3 major parts. We call that nucleus, halo, and bulge. We will talk about that in the next coming lectures. And most of, when you look at these star clusters, the globular clusters are mostly located in the halo and the central bulge of a galaxy. And if you can't understand what this means now, just don't worry about it, because I will show you what is the halo. I mean, where is the halo of the galaxy, and here is the bulge of the galaxy and the disk and those kind of things in coming lectures when you talk about galaxies, right? And in terms of the size, you can see that the globular clusters have around 50 to 450 light years. So they are huge in terms of the size, and the open clusters less than 30 light years. Right? And in a similar way, if you look at the mass of this one of these clusters, globular clusters are more massive compared to open clusters, right? And also the number of stars, of course, if globular clusters are massive, they should have large number of stars, right? So they have, you can see millions of stars in one cluster. However, when you look at an open cluster, they have around 52,000 stars, right? And you can see that there are, I mean, some properties for the associations, which I'm not paying that much attention, but just I have it in here as the table, because just need to make sure that you know that there is a type like that. But what we are focusing here as types of star clusters is globular clusters and open clusters, right? And if you look at the luminosity of a star, uh, uh, it seems like globular clusters has some kind of higher luminosity, but you can see they are roughly in the same region, right? Now, one of the very interesting and important things about these two types of star clusters, if you look at the age of these star clusters, for the globular clusters, they are billions of years of age, right? And because of that, studying globular clusters will give you a good idea about the age of our universe, because they are one of the like the oldest I mean entities that we have in our universe, right? And open clusters compared to the globular clusters, they are, I mean, relatively young. They are few 100 million years. They have unusually large clusters, and I mean, in the case of unusually large clusters, more than a billion years. So there are some clusters that are very old, but in average, they are young clusters. Right? They don't have like that much age, right? So these are the basic properties of globular clusters and the open clusters. So I will actually explain this in furthermore. Now, so the take home message here for you is you can now understand how we make these HR diagrams and how we study these different properties of different stars, even though they have a huge lifetime compared to us. The answer is we actually use star clusters to study different properties of the stars. And there are two types of star clusters, globular clusters and open clusters. And globular clusters are relatively old, and they are huge or large in terms of their size, and they have they are normally located in a halo and central bulge region in a galaxy, where you have open clusters most of the time located in the disk of the galaxy, and spiral arms if you have a spiral galaxy. And and also one of the important properties of a globular cluster is globular clusters are very old compared to open clusters, right? Right. So I already have told you these things, but if I go through those again, uh, stars often form within these molecular clouds, as we discussed, and you know. This one cloud can form hundreds to thousands of stars together, right? So this is why we see these type of star clusters. And when these stars are formed initially, they roughly form at the same time, right? Because they are forming from one molecular cloud, they will form at the same time. So because of that, they will have the same kind of age, right? Now this is why star clusters are important when we study about different properties. So they are formed from one molecular cloud at the same time, so which means they will have the same age. However, uh, when they form at the beginning, they will have different initial conditions, right? So they will have different initial masses, and because of that, these stars had different ranges in terms of their properties, including mass. Some of them have high mass, some of them have low mass. You know, this is similar to birth of humans, right? Every human is like, you know, birth, not, I mean, you don't have the same properties in each human, right? I mean, some of them are girls, boys, and some of them are, you know, in terms of the height and the weight. I mean, the only thing is in humans we don't have like much variation at the birth. There are only few variations, but the stars, their variations are very huge. I mean, you can have very low mass to very high mass stars like that, right? In terms of the size also, it is the same thing, and also the brightness. Now, this is why when you look at an HR diagram of a star cluster, you have all kinds of stars there, right? And we will talk about these two main types of stars, star clusters, that is open clusters and globular clusters, right? Now, why these star clusters are important for us? Because astronomers learn about how stars evolve using these HR diagrams, right? Now, the problem is it is not easy to make HR diagrams for large number of isolated stars, which means if you do not have these star clusters, you need to get these isolated stars from here and there, and then you have to make an HR diagram, right? Now, to make the HR diagram, the problem is, I don't remember whether you remember these, the axis that we have in HR diagram, right? So if I go ahead, this is an HR diagram. You need to measure the luminosity and you have to measure the surface temperature, right? And now if you need to make an HR diagram, you have to measure these things, right? Now this is the challenge that we have if we are going to like have different isolated stars, right? For each one, you have to measure the luminosity and the temperature. But the advantage that we have when we look at a star cluster, they are kind of at the same position, right? So which means they are roughly at the same distance, right? Now, when you measure the luminosity of a star, to measure the luminosity, you have to find the distance to that particular star, right? Because different stars are at different distances now. If you are looking at isolated stars, first you have to find the distance to the star and then the luminosity, right? Now the advantage is here when you look at a star cluster, so they are all the stars are in the same location, even though they have different properties, we can assume that roughly they are in the same distance. Of course, there will be changes, but I mean, roughly you can assume that they will be at the same distance, right? Now, so that is one advantage of that we have when we use star clusters to make HR diagram, right? And because of that, you can see that these star clusters are very useful when we make HR diagrams, because it's, you don't have to measure the distance to each and every star, right? Right, now let's look at uh, properties of these two types of star clusters. You already saw some of the properties from the table. And for the open clusters, they typically contains tens or hundreds of stars, right? Normally they have tens to hundreds of stars, and they are about 10 light years in diameter. Uh, it can go up to 30 light years, as you saw in this table. And they are loosely grouped, so which means they are not very tightly bound to each other. These stars, they are, I mean, somewhat loosely grouped. And most open clusters contain all types of main sequence stars. Remember that if I show you an HR diagram, here is an HR diagram, and here is the main sequence of the HR diagram. You can see that in the HR diagram, you normally have all types of stars, which means starting from this lower right hand corner up to the top left hand corner on this line, it is filled with stars. So what that means is you have stars, all kind of stars with different temperatures and different luminosities, right? So that is the idea. Now when you look at an open cluster, normally contains all types of main sequence stars, and this includes O and B type stars, right? Now the reason that it has mentioned O and B type stars, you can understand that if you look at an HR diagram, O and B type stars are mostly in this location in the top left hand corner. That is because if you go back and look at the spectral classification, O and B type stars are the hottest stars, which means their temperature is higher and they have a high luminosity. And because of that, all these O and B type stars are roughly in this region of the main sequence, right? And so what I'm talking is normally O and B type stars are normally located in this region right here. So what that means is their temperature is higher, and you can see because the temperature increases towards this direction and luminosity increases towards this direction, their temperature and luminosity is higher. And also there is another property that we discussed about these O and B type stars. Anybody remember what is the other property that is important here? Anybody have any idea? We have discussed about the luminosity, temperature, and main sequence is also another sequence. If you remember what I told about the main sequence is also a sequence of what is? So please go back and check your previous notes, right? Main sequence is also a mass sequence, which means high mass, all these high mass stars will be located in this region, right? All the high mass stars will be here, right? And when you go down in the main sequence, the mass will be lower and lower, will become smaller. Remember that the sun was somewhere here, which is one solar mass, and the stars in this region right here is those are the stars with highest mass, right? Larger mass. So the larger mass means their temperature is higher if they are on the main sequence, their luminosity is higher, and at the same time their nuclear reactions will be faster, so they will not spend much time on the main sequence, and there is a high probability that they will quickly move out from the main sequence, right? Now this is why I have mentioned here that most open clusters contain all types of main sequence stars, including O and B stars, because when a star cluster get older and older with the time, these O and you cannot see these O and B type stars, right? And this is one of the main differences actually between open clusters and globular clusters, because the globular clusters are older, so their age is large. You can see that their age goes up to 12 billion years, which means they are very old, so that you should not be able to see these O and B type stars in globular clusters, right? I mean, there may be one or two very rarely, but I mean, in general, statistically, there shouldn't be O and B type stars in these globular clusters because they are very old, so they have enough time for these O and B type stars to evolve into different other types of stars, such as red giants or white dwarf, like that, right? And at the same time, as you know, these O and B type stars must be very young since they have shorter lifetime, right? Now, this is why you can see those in open clusters, because open clusters are relatively younger than the globular clusters, so that you will see these young stars in open cluster, right? And all the stars in a cluster have similar ages, which implies that entire cluster must be young, right? Now these are, you can see that you don't need to remember everything, right? You can relate all these things into an HR diagram and logically construct the relations. Now, as I told you, all the stars in a star cluster begins from a molecular cloud, and because of that, they all of them should have the same age, but with different initial, because of the different initial properties. Some of them will be O and B type stars, and others will be different belongs to different spectral classes, right? But since they all have the birth at the same time, if you can see these O and B type stars in an open star cluster, so that means this entire star cluster must be young, right? Because they have the same age, though they are at different positions on the HR diagram. Right? So I hope you can understand this. If not, feel free to ask at any time so that I will explain it again using one or two examples, right? Right. Now, here are examples of two open clusters. The one in the left hand side should be familiar to anyone who even have a little interest in astronomy, and this is called Pleiades star cluster, and in Sinhala this is called, I guess, Haddinatharu, and also this is called as Seven Sisters, because when you look at this particular star cluster, you will see around 6 to 7 stars that are very bright, right? That does not mean that there are only 7 stars in the star cluster. There are around hundreds to thousands of stars in this particular star cluster, but there are 6 or 7 stars that you have that you can see from your naked eye, right, easily. And some says you can see 6 of the stars, and some say you can see like 7 stars, and some try to count 7 stars. There are there's those kind of things involved. But if you have a binocular with you, astronomical binocular, this star cluster seems to be very beautiful at the night, right? Because you can see some other stars, and I mean, unfortunately, you won't get the chance of looking at these things due to the conditions. Otherwise, we would be able to, yeah, I mean, stay up for one night and look at all these star clusters and everything. And we have also just received one of the larger telescopes now in the university to the department, I guess, few weeks ago as well, a 12-inch beam telescope. I guess we have received it like few weeks ago. Unfortunately, we cannot do anything at this time. And the one in the right hand side is called Jewel Box, or NGC 4755. Again, an open cluster which is around 6,400 light years away from the sun. And you can see that the stars have different colors, so that tells you they are belongs to different spectral classes, and you have all the types of stars in these star clusters, right? So that is the idea. Right. So I guess I have shown you before. This is the HR diagram of this particular cluster, Pleiades star cluster, right? So the star cluster that you see up in the night each and every day is the Pleiades star cluster. And if you can roughly assume that all these stars are roughly at the same distance, and you can measure the luminosity and the surface temperature. I mean, you don't have to measure the surface temperature, you just need to measure the spectral class. Also, I mean, will give you the same information. And then you can make this HR diagram and have the HR diagram yourself, right? So this is probably a good exercise if you can do it yourself, right? And this data is available if you want to plot that. And maybe I will try to give you this as an exercise if you have a computer to do it, right? This is another star cluster, young cluster called NGC 2264, and this one actually is another star cluster This is around 2600 light years from us. And you can see that there are newly formed stars, and once again you have the HR diagram right here, right, of that particular star cluster, and you can see that there is a red line that goes through it. So here are the stars that goes on the main sequence up to here. Right. Now, what you need to understand here is when these star clusters gets older, their HR diagram begins to change, right? So the HR diagram will not be the same as when they are young, because for the young star clusters, when the stars are very young, you will see lots of O and B type stars in this region, right? So what happens is with when they become older and older, these young stars, especially O and B type stars, they will quickly end up their hydrogen burning stage, and then will move out to these giant phases, right? Because of that, when you get when the stars get old, the cluster gets older, if you look at an HR diagram of that, you will not see stars in this region, right? So that's how it works. Normally the stars will move out, and you can see the trend, like you have this all the stars in this line, and then they started to move out like this. So that is the trend that you will have when the stars cluster gets older, right? So what will happen is these most massive stars use up the hydrogen in their cores and evolve of main sequence to become red giant and a supergiant, right? Remember that how these things become red giant and supergiant we learned before the new year in the last lecture. And when the more time passes, the stars of lower mass begin to leave the main sequence and make their way to upper right corner of the HR diagram. When the time passes, now if you look at the same HR diagram of the same star cluster, maybe after a few million years, there will be more and more stars even in this lower region that will go out from the main sequence, right? And you know the process. Once the hydrogen finishes at the central region and has become helium, then they will move out to these different stages, right? For example, they will go into these giant phases. Now the giant phases means the stars will be in this top right hand corner like that, right? Now one thing that you have to learn from here is, if I give you two HR diagrams for you to look at, you should be able to decide just by looking at those two HR diagrams. You can see that you should be able to decide which cluster is older and which cluster is new, right? So the reason is the logic is right here. Once the cluster get older and older, these O and B type stars, they will consume all their fuel and will move out from the main sequence, right? Now this is actually a star cluster called NGC 2264. Sorry, this is actually a cluster called M41, which is older than NGC 2264. And if you look at, this is the NGC 2264. And you can see that all the stars are up to here, up to the 100 solar luminosity. All the stars are still on the main sequence, right? So this is NGC 2264, that is a young open star cluster. And if you compare this particular star cluster, this is a the cluster name is M41, and this cluster is bit older compared to this previous cluster. And you can see that the main sequence started to turn towards this upper right region from this particular point, right, which is around 10 solar luminosity. So this indicates that this particular cluster should be older compared to the previous one, right? And so this is why I told you, if I give you this HR diagram and this HR diagram, just observing the shape of the the main sequence, you should be able to tell which one is older and which one is new, right? So that is what I want to mention here, right? Now, here is another one, which is again older cluster even than this one right here, right? So this is M41, which is an older. When it gets more and more older, if you think about another cluster that is even more, or I mean even older than this previous one, and this is an hypothetical star cluster which has an age of 4.24 billion years. You can see that this is a very old cluster, right? Now you can see that this main sequence has turned from this particular point. Even it has become even lower. So this turning point become lower and lower when the star cluster get older and older, right? So that is the idea, right? And we have a specific name for that. The location of the HR diagram where the stars have begun to leave the main sequence is called main sequence turn off, right? This location is what we called as main sequence turn off, right? Remember that name, right? So all the older the cluster, the lower the point on the main sequence where the stars begin to move towards to the red giant region, right? So the stars move towards this region at this particular point, right? Right. So that's about how you can tell age of a star cluster just by looking at the HR diagram, right? Remember that fact will be very important for you. And so let me look at this one right here. The next type of star clusters is globular clusters. So they are generally contain thousands or even millions of stars. They typically, the size is around 100 light years in diameter, and you can see that they are relatively large compared to these open clusters, and they are very tightly grouped, and they have this nice spherical shape for the clusters, right? So this is a spherical cluster, and these clusters are usually lack in young main sequence stars, so they are not very young, I mean like in young main sequence stars, which indicates that its high mass stars have already evolved off the main sequence. This implies that globular clusters are fairly old, right? And you can understand the reason now, the same reason that I have mentioned. And if you look at our galaxy, I have mentioned that this in the previous table as well, there are around 200 globular clusters. Some of these are nearly as old as the universe itself, right? And you can see that when I tell this, the globular cluster is a good, clusters are a good way for researchers to understand about and take an idea about get an idea about the age of the universe, right? Because age of a globular cluster may be very close to the age of the universe as well. In fact, that was one of the methods that astronomers used to get an idea about the age of the universe. And here is how a globular cluster looks like, right? And here is an HR diagram of the globular cluster. It should be M47, I guess. It says just, okay, it says cluster 47, right? And this is a globular cluster. And you can see that the main sequence has turned off from right here. What you need to be, when you look at this particular diagram, you need to be careful that at this particular point, the main sequence has turned off, but this is just one solar luminosity, right? So these diagrams are in different scales. This one is turned off little bit, very close to one, but maybe a little bit more than one. And here it's 10 solar luminosity right here. And this is, the scale is different right here, but the turn off point is right here because it's a very old globular cluster, right? Now in practice, as you see here, the astronomers use the position at the top of the main sequence as the measure of the age of a star cluster. So that is this point right here, right? This point right here. So that is the position at the top of the main sequence. All of the globular clusters have main sequence that turn off at a luminosity less than that of the sun. So that's a property of globular clusters. You can see that the globular clusters has this main sequence turn off point with the luminosity less than that of the sun. So which means here is the solar luminosity 1. So this should be probably turn off point you can take somewhere right here, right? Because start curved at that particular point. And star formation in these crowded systems ceased billions of years ago, which means there are no new stars forming in these globular clusters. The star formation has stopped billions of years ago, right? Since these are the oldest objects that we know of, this estimate is one of the best limits that we have on the age of the universe itself, right? So this is what I have mentioned. These are one of the oldest objects that you can have in the universe, and because of that we can get a good estimate to the age of the universe itself, right? So this is why, you know, globular clusters and open clusters are important, and I will probably discuss a little bit more about these globular clusters when we go into the cosmology part, because that this relates to finding the age of the universe, right? And here is again a good comparison of HR diagram of different, you know, different types of uh, main sequence. This is a zero age main sequence with newborn, all the newborn stars. All the stars are on the main sequence, and after some time, after 100 million years, you can see that this has turned off from here. And then after 10 billion years, the main sequence has turned off right from right here. So it's a nice property that you can exploit and do different things, right? Right. So that's about all about uh, the star clusters, open star clusters and globular star clusters. Now, before I move, I think we started at 8:59. I have some time to go for the next section. And anybody have any questions about these star clusters section or anything else? Right. So if not, let me just at least start the next section, which is about the stellar deaths, death of low mass stars. Right, now we have learned about again about the interstellar matter and how stars forms and how stars become and move into the main sequence. And then I told that depending on the initial mass of the star, they will go through different evolutionary processes. And this thing, then we talked about star clusters, because star clusters are one of the key things that we use in the field of research, that how to, you know, look at different properties of stars and get the age of the star clusters. You can use you know, star clusters. And now I am coming back again to this stellar evolutionary life cycle, and now this will be a good point for you to remember what you have done, what uh, you know, did before the new year. Remember, we talked about this phase. Once you have a molecular cloud, then molecular cloud, once it satisfies certain conditions, you will have a protostar, right? And you can see the open cluster is right here. Right? So this is like all the stars are born in a cluster, right? And then depending on the initial mass of the stars, there are certain number of stars that we also called as failed stars. They don't have enough mass to burn hydrogen into helium, and they will become brown dwarfs. And as far as I remember, we talked about that. And then for the other stars, the low mass stars will follow a one particular path, and the high mass stars will follow another particular path. Now, what I am doing today is just look at this path right here, right? What happened to low mass stars and how these processes that goes on, right? Maybe we will not talk about the nova and supernova, which will be a separate section, but we will talk about these things, how we can have a planetary nebula and a white dwarf at the end, right? So let's look at that part. Now, all main sequence stars eventually evolve off the main sequence and become giant stars, right? So that we talked about that. And then what happens after that depends strongly on the star's mass, right? So all the stars will be on the main sequence, and they will one day evolve into a giant star, right? So that's usual for all the stars. But what happens after next will depend strongly on the star's mass, right? So this is why you have two separate sections in this diagram. For the low mass, there is a one path, and for the high mass, there is another path, right? Right. Now, when you have a star with the main sequence mass less than 8 solar masses, they will never be able to burn carbon in their cores, right? Remember, what happens is hydrogen will burn into helium, and once that happens, all these stars will move out from the main sequence into giant phases. And then in the core, you have the helium, and some stars will be able to burn helium into carbon, right? But there are smaller stars that they will never be able to, sorry, they will burn helium into carbon. But after that, for these low mass stars, which are the stars that are less than 8 solar masses, when they are on the main sequence, they will never be able to burn carbon in their cores, right? Remember, there is a sequence that happens. Hydrogen becomes helium, and then the helium becomes next heavier element, carbon, and then it will go for another other heavy elements, right? And however, when you have these stars which are around like less than 8 solar masses, they cannot burn carbon in their cores, right? Because their mass is smaller, so they cannot contract the star due to the smaller mass to increase the temperature to a point that they can burn carbon, right? So that's the idea. Remember that all these reactions are fusion reactions, nuclear fusion reactions. So to go from hydrogen to helium, they need to satisfy a certain temperature, and from helium to carbon, they need to satisfy a certain temperature. Like that, they keep on going, making heavier materials, right, inside the star. But for these lower mass stars that are less than 8 solar masses, they cannot make carbon into heavier materials, right? Now, we will refer these type of stars as low mass stars, even though they are around 8 solar masses or less than that, right? Now, if you look at the high mass stars, they will be able to burn carbon and other heavy elements, right? And because of that, they will follow a different end state and different path. And we will talk about that in a separate lecture. But for today, we will be focused more into what happens into these low mass stars, right? Now, when you look at the helium fusion, uh, that will cease on these low mass stars, especially in the core, right? Cease means stop, right? So that's the simple word for that. And so what will happen is when this helium fusion ceases in the core of a low mass star, then it leaves an unburning core, right? Which means when helium fusion ceases, you have carbon at the center, right? So you have a basically carbon ash at the center, right? And the carbon ash is not burning because it doesn't have enough, needed conditions for that. So what happens is, again, the core begins to collapse because of the gravity, right? You know that once this fusion reaction stopped at the center, there is not enough temperature generating to make the pressure, which creates the force that need to uh, balance the gravity. So when you do not have that, then what will happen is gravity always wins, right? So the gravity will start to contract the star, right? And so when it is start to contract, this collapse leads to increased central temperature and promotes helium shell burning, right? Now, if you remember, we talked, there is a core at the center that where you have this carbon ash, and outside the carbon ash, there is a helium shell, right? And we just go back to our lectures and look at that. This helium shell will start to burn when the central temperature increases, right? Because once again, what I am telling here is you have the carbon ash at the center and surrounding helium shell after that. So what happens is you don't have enough temperature at the central region to burn carbon into heavy elements. So what will happen is then the gravity start to contract everything towards the center. And when that happens, the helium shell start to burn, right? Because now you get some temperature because of this contraction, right? And also there is a hydrogen shell in the outer region still taking place, burning. That hydrogen burning cell burning still happens in this outer region of the star. And what happens is this outer envelope of the star will expand to compensate, right? So at the same time, the outer envelope of the star will expand and the star will become a supergiant because the size will be increased, right? Right, so this is how it looks like for a core of a low mass supergiant. So at the central region, you can see that there is a region that you have this carbon and maybe sometimes oxygen as well. And then you have the helium fusion shell, which will become, helium is fusing in that shell. And outer region, you have this hydrogen fusion shell. So once the central temperature increases, this part right here will be expanded, right? So that's how it becomes a supergiant, right? So what happens here is this increase in size of a supergiant star leads to corresponding increase in the luminosity. So when remember that under the properties of the stars, we discussed that there are two things that effect for the luminosity of a star, that is the temperature and the surface area, right? Which means now when this become a supergiant, so that means the size get larger, the surface temperature gets larger, and because of that, these stars will increase their luminosity. Not because of the temperature gets higher, this is because their size or the surface area gets larger. And this process makes a vertical rise on the HR diagram for a particular star, and this is called asymptotic giant branch, right? So this is what I mean, because this is the branch that I am talking about, right? Asymptotic giant branch. So it is somewhere here, and because of this outer shell, hydrogen shell expansion, it becomes very large and the luminosity increases suddenly, so that the star will move on to position like this, right? And then you will have a planetary nebula after that, and we will show this here, right? Now, even in the supergiant stage, it continues to burn hydrogen into helium in this outside shell, right? In the outside, it will become, the hydrogen will burn into helium. And this helium shell burning will become very erratic, and leading to helium shell flashes, right? And this outer region will continue to expand and becoming more and more unstable, and also there will be a significant mass loss at the same time. Now what I have taken here is what happens in this outer shell, right? So it will continue to expand and become more and more larger. Now after few million years, remember this does not happen within 1 or 2 days, but after few million years, this outer region of the star will be ejected into the space. So there is a core at the center, and then there is a helium burning shell, and in the outer region there is this hydrogen burning shell, which will continue to burn hydrogen into helium and getting expanded. And there, after few million years, what will happen is this outer region will be ejected into the space, right? So which means now once this happens, the star will have two distinct components. There will be two components for the star when this particular thing happens. Number one is expanding envelope. So there will be an envelope kind of thing, an expanding envelope thing, and this is relatively cool, and this is what actually have the ejected part, and there will be a core at the center of the star. So that core mainly made of carbon ash, right? And I guess you can understand this. And these type of objects are what we call as planetary nebula. Now you may have heard these names. What you may not know is how these things happens, right? So that's what we are discussing here. Once again, from the red giant phase, you have this hydrogen burning, helium burning shell and carbon ash at the central region, and there is a hydrogen burning shell in the outer region. So what happens is, since you do not have enough central temperature to burn carbon, the star will get contracted toward the center, and at the same time, so when it is getting contracted, the temperature increases, and due to the increase of the temperature, the surrounding helium shell will start to burn, and at the same time in the outer region you have this hydrogen shell which will convert hydrogen into helium, right? Now what happens over the time is this hydrogen shell in the outer region will get expanded, and after a few million years you will clearly have two distinct components in this particular star, that is an expanding envelope and this dense core with carbon ash, right? And we call this particular object as a planetary nebula. So that's what happens, and here are like few different types of planetary nebulas, and this is called blinking planetary nebula. And here is another one called IC 418 or spirograph nebula. These are just like examples, and you can clearly see that this central region right here is right here, and then you have this outer core, right? So these type of objects are what we called as planetary nebula, and this is one of the famous ones, the Cat's Eye Nebula, like that, right? So let me now to finish this. Now we talked up to a point where we have a planetary nebula. So what happens is, with the age, even after the planetary nebula, this surrounding shell of gas will eventually disperse, right, and disappear from the view. So you will have the planetary nebula which has two distinct components, the carbon ash core and this outer region, right? And what will happen is, after some time, this outer region will disperse or disappear from our view, and then what we will have is this core with this carbon ash, right, mostly with the carbon, and this particular object is now called as the white dwarf, right? Now these white dwarfs are very different from ordinary stars because they are not undergoing any kind of fusion reactions in their cores. They have mostly this carbon ash. So what will happen is, since they do not have any nuclear reactions at the center or the fusion reactions at the center, they will shrunk more and more, right? So they become more and more smaller because of the gravitational forces, and will become very dense objects, right? Now they are typically about 100 times smaller than the sun, and you can see the size of these white dwarfs, right? But you know that there should be some kind of force at the end that will prevent this collapsing these objects more, right? Because gravity always there. So that's attractive force. When you have these dense objects which are 100 times smaller than the sun, you can see there should be gravitational forces that makes these objects contract towards the center. And since we do not have any fusion reactions going on now inside white dwarfs, there should be some kind of force that stop collapsing these objects furthermore after white dwarf, right? Now that collapsing of this object will be stopped by something called electron pressure, right? And this is also called as electron degenerate pressure. Right? And how this happens is when electrons are tightly packed together, the electrons repel each other, right? Now this repel of electrons will create a pressure which we call as electron degenerate pressure. Now those gravitational force contraction of a white dwarf will be balanced by this electron degenerate pressure, so that the white dwarf will be at the end will be a stable star, right? And what will happen in terms of the HR diagram is at the end this will produce a sequence of white dwarfs. Right? Now this is what happens after it leaves the main sequence, and I have actually mentioned here what happens for these particular stars. So it will go up to a point like A here, and then it will become a giant, and then after that, once you have this outer shell removed from the star, it will become a white dwarf, and the white dwarfs are very faint objects, so they will end up in this region right here after the evolutionary process, right? So this is one of the stages that the star will become at the end, right? And I have a lot of information here for you to read, so make sure that you read through those once the presentation is uploaded. And here is a nice one property that you can see for the white dwarfs is that they are less luminous, but at the same time their temperature is higher, right? So they are on this region. So it goes towards the higher temperature region, right? Because of these higher temperatures, maybe in the higher temperatures in the core. And here is a visible light and X-ray images of the Sirius star system. Sirius star, you know that Sirius is a bright star, but there are two stars called Sirius A and Sirius B. And what you normally see from as the bright star is the Sirius A, but there is another star called Sirius B, which is a tiny faint star. In this image, this is the Sirius B, this is the Sirius A, and by the way, this Sirius B is a white dwarf, right? So that is why it is very faint and it's hard to see it. And another thing that I need to mention you here is this particular image is overexposed, so that you can see this particular star right here, right? Because if you do not overexpose, then you will see this as a clear star without overexposing, but then you will not be able to see this one, right? So to see this, you have to overexpose this one, which means you have to increase the exposure time of the camera to take this picture, so that this will be overexposed while you can still see this faint object. Now the same two stars are taken as from my X-ray telescope, and this is how it looks like. Now you can see that the Sirius B, which was the white dwarf, looks more clear compared to this particular star right here, Sirius A, right? So that is as a result of because when you take an image from an X-ray telescope or from X-rays, the hot star appears more prominent in the picture, right? Because it emits X-rays, because it has a higher temperature. Now that is what has happened. Now you can nicely relate this all this information to this diagram. Now when it becomes a white dwarf, right here, its temperature is higher because the star has from this region it has gone towards the left region. Now it has increased its temperature, which means the star should be more clear in X-ray images, right? Now that's what has happened right here. Now, at the same time, please understand that why astronomers are using different types of wavelengths to observe different things. We have actually discussed about this in one of these previous lectures about electromagnetic spectrum and telescopes, right? Right. So here is a field that you have like white dwarfs. As you see, even though they are hot in terms of the temperature, since they are less luminous, it is not easy to detect these white dwarfs, right, from normal telescopes because they are faint objects, right? So this is what happens to these low mass stars uh, during the stellar evolution, right? Once again, if I summarize it, so what happens is they will be on the main sequence and will become giants. And since they are low mass stars, they do not have enough mass to make fusion reactions and burn carbon into heavy metals. Because of that, there will be carbon ash at the center. And since you do not have fusion reactions at the center, the star will get contracted due to the gravity. Then this helium shell started to burn, and at the same time, there is an outer shell, outer hydrogen shell. So that will start to burn and get expanded, and there will be a point after so many years that you can clearly see two distinct parts in this star, that is this core with carbon ash and this envelope, which is the outer region with the hydrogen burning shell. And after so many years, we call that particular object as a planetary nebula. And after few million years, this outer shell will diffuse and disappear, and only this central core region will remain on the star with this carbon ash, or mostly that contains carbon, and that particular object is what we call as white dwarfs. And white dwarfs are fainter objects. However, since they are moving towards the left side of the HR diagram, they are hot in temperature, and they do not have any fusion reactions that happens at the central region. However, they are balanced by the gravity due to the electron degenerate pressure or electron pressure, right? Electron pressure is when all these atoms squeeze together, the electron makes a pressure that can work against the gravity. So that's what happens, right? So this summarizes everything that I have talked today. And on the next day, I will talk about what happened to these high mass stars. And as a result of high mass stars, we have a nice few nice phenomena such as black holes and supernovas, which I will briefly talk on the next day. But I will not go into too much details about, especially about some of the properties about the black holes, because my plan is to teach you the mathematical side of this cosmology, especially about the general relativity. Then we will be able to talk about different properties of these black holes and all these things, right? Right. Now, anybody have any questions up to here before we stop?